I'm John Little, and this is the ShockCast, broadcasting from an overcast Taipei evening on Saturday, September 15th, 2018. Before getting started today, I want to add a brief note, as I've been doing for the past few weeks. I've reorganized this YouTube channel a bit. It looks better, and you can see the list of channels that I recommend the most. Other channels are great, but those seem to be the best channels to start with. If you have a channel recommendation, please share it with us in the comments section below. I'm always on the lookout for good and even better sources of information. I also hope to have an introductory video up soon for new listeners. Also, don't forget this week's playlist. You can find it in the playlist section of this channel, in the comments section below, or at the end of this video, and you'll see it either on the end and of course in the comments section is below. Those are the 10 best videos of this past week, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy them, or at least benefit from them as much as I did. Now let's begin today's program. Nuts and 9/11. 9/11 represents a turning point in American and world history. The events that followed that terrible day could not have happened without 9/11 or something like it. The problem with 9/11 isn't the numbers of people killed or the horror of that event. No, the problem is with the deception surrounding it and the events that followed. It has been 17 years as of this past week, 17, and we still haven't learned the truth. And this deception is amazing for its depth and the inability of intelligent people to perceive that there ever was a deception. Unfortunately, we have nuts who are muddying the waters. I have to keep reminding myself that crazy people mean well when they try to get you to join in their madness. I get that since I'm pretty crazy myself. The problem is that there are some conspiracy nuts out there that are muddying the waters, keeping you from seeing what's really happening as they ply you with their outraged rhetoric. They mean well, and some of what they say is useful, but they aren't thinking properly about the events that they talk about. I'm talking about 9/11 here, but I could be talking about almost any other conspiracy fact. And no, I did not make a mistake in my wording. The events of 9/11 and others are conspiracy facts, not conspiracy theories. The challenge is in separating the fact from the fiction. This was brought home to me when I was watching a video called 9/11 War Games. James Corbett means well. He's good at uncovering facts, and he's good at weaving facts together to create an interesting story. But he's not very good at getting to the core of that story. Worse, he's an anti-Semite who has worked with one of the worst anti-Semites on the internet. That person is Michelle Chossudovsky. That foul human being runs a website called Global Research, and it's a cleverly packaged pack of lies. The best lies are created by mixing in truth before adding poisonous dishonesty, and Professor Chossudovsky is a master at the art of deceit. If you read and believe what he produces on Global Research, you will be deceived. And yes, James Corbett was deceived and, unfortunately, has become something of a deceiver. How so? Well, in that 9/11 War Games video, notice the storyline that James weaves. Listen to the detail that he throws in and how he throws it in. And as you reach the end of the video, you will be left with only one conclusion, that the conspiracy behind 9/11 was vast. Well, I can tell you that it wasn't. In fact, I have a personal name for the conspirators at the center of the 9/11 events. I call them the Unit. They weren't a unit for very long, but they were together for long enough to launch America and the world on the path of horrifying devastation. Now, I'm not an expert in covert operations, but I have spent a little time studying these covert operations. I have a formal education in how good organizations work, and it doesn't take a lot of reading to figure out what I'm about to tell you. For covert operations to be successful, we have a number of rules that you should follow. If you want to have a successful covert operation, you'd better not break these if you want to be undetected and succeed. The first one is KISS. Remember that Keep It Simple Stupid works as well for covert operations as it does for almost anything else. This means that any operation must have as few moving parts as possible. Never have more than the fewest number of people. Never. The next one is always use tried and true methods for achieving your goals. New technologies and new methods should never be used unless absolutely necessary. You don't want that new gizmo not working properly at the wrong time. The next one is no loose ends. For high-risk, high-reward targets, most of your operations personnel must either be eliminated or be able to be silenced in some other way during and after the event if detection must be avoided. No matter how many people you have to kill, well, if you're in covert ops and if you're that high up, you probably don't have a hard time killing people. Just saying. The next one is always provide plausible deniability. Absolute deniability is often unnecessary as long as there are people willing and able to run interference for you. And of course we saw that. The next one is need to know. No one, except 2 or 3 people, should ever be allowed to know everything about the operation. Everything should operate on a need to know basis. And those who know too much should probably be eliminated or be at least vulnerable to extreme blackmail. There are other covert operation rules, but I suspect I'm missing a few. Please feel free to add a few in the comments section below if you think that I've missed some that should have been mentioned. But it's good enough for now. The challenge then is finding the covert operation team that successfully operated by those rules, well, for 9/11. How do you do that? Well, you start with the facts, the obvious ones. In fact, the case of 9/11, the most obvious fact is World Trade Center Building Number 7. WTC 7 could not have fallen for the reasons that they claimed. That's all that you need to start looking. Now, we can start looking for the unit. There were probably 2 or 3 people running the operation, and at least one of them was Dick Cheney. But the leader might have been, or probably was, George Bush Sr. The other leader of the operation was definitely King Fahd of Saudi Arabia. In fact, he might have been the one that got it all started. Who knows? King Fahd provided the teams that could be killed to cover up the operation. Those that weren't killed could be ignored because they either didn't speak English or could be disbelieved for other reasons. Americans could never be trusted to efficiently kill other Americans, and trust is essential in a situation like this. Who were the teams that King Fahd provided? Remember that the buildings had to be wired for demolition beforehand, so that's Team 1. Team 2 would have been the hijackers. And please, stop it with the hysterical stories of nuclear weapons, nanothermites, scalar waves, remote-controlled planes, and aliens. Remember that the simplest explanation is probably the most likely. If you don't know Occam's razor, look it up. Pre-wired buildings hit by hijacked airplanes is the best explanation there is. And in fact, you wouldn't need that much of an airplane, just enough to make it convincing as the buildings were destroyed. Remember, what brought down the buildings weren't the airplanes. Just saying. Okay, remember all the theories that others have thrown out there, they add complexity to an operation, and complexity leads to failure. Okay, moving on. Now, some of the confusion comes from those who were watching this operation together. So, some people thought that they saw the unit when in actuality they were watching the watchers. And I believe that some of those people might have chosen to take advantage of their inside knowledge. For instance, the guy who bought the World Trade Center towers probably was not in on the operation, but he probably knew enough to make a lot of money. The same goes for the guys who shorted American Airlines stock the day before the operation. They knew that something was going down and they took advantage of that knowledge. This does not mean that they were a part of the operation. Only a fool would allow key operatives to do something like that, although greed can make men into fools. Or maybe I should say that anyone who compromised operational security by engaging in such activities as personal profit wouldn't live very long if I was running that operation. A lot of intelligence agencies would have seen signs that something was happening, and they would have been able to deduce the target. Beyond that, I'm not sure what they would have known. The people running the unit were real pros, and you have to respect that kind of ability. Even as you do your very best to stop and kill those kinds of people, you still need to respect them. My point is that James Corbett and others have muddied the waters by not looking at this issue through the lens of covert operations. They mean well, but ultimately they aren't helping. Oh, and my main point in all of this is, your job is to communicate the truth. That is a different thing than facts. Yes, facts are included in the truth, but truth is a whole lot more than that. And if you want people to accept the truth, you need to provide them with facts that are unassailable, that cannot be argued with. That's why I focus on World Trade Center Building Number 7, and only World Trade Center Building Number 7. If you talk about anything else, you will be seen as nuts, and that is the point. Don't go nuts over 9/11. Just stick to the obvious. Now we get to the next important part of the ShockCast, the news and analysis from this past week. But before going on, take a moment to click the subscribe button below and hit the bell to be notified when the next ShockCast happens. Those of you listening via MP3, make sure that you are subscribed to the Shock Letter at theshockletter.com. And there's an important reason to be subscribed to the Shock Letter, since I usually do not have the time on the ShockCast to talk about more than just a quarter of the news that I analyze at Omega Shock and on the Shock Letter. So subscribe to the Shock Letter and get all the news and links that I analyze for free. In fact, everyone should sign up for the Shock Letter. Subscribing and unsubscribing is simple and easy, and there's no way that I would ever share the subscription list with anyone, period. I'm not in this for the money and never will be. Now, for our first article, it was titled Group Officials Destroying Crosses Burning Bibles in China. Don't know why it's called Group, but moving on. China is by definition Antichrist, and they are showing their Antichrist colors more and more clearly each and every day. I'm just glad that the gospel had such freedom in China before now, enough for 10% of China to accept Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. Now that freedom is being destroyed. Of course, the Chinese Communist Party might be able to close down big churches and big church buildings, but they cannot shut down God. In fact, this persecution will probably spread even further. The gospel, I mean. Spreading. Persecution tends to spread the gospel quite wide. But I deeply regret the pain and suffering that our Chinese brothers and sisters are about to experience. Here's a quote of several paragraphs in this article. From the AP. China's government is ratcheting up the crackdown on Christian congregations in Beijing and several provinces, destroying crosses, burning Bibles, shutting churches, and ordering followers to sign papers renouncing their faith according to pastors and a group that monitors religion in China. The campaign corresponds with a drive to sinicize religion by demanding loyalty to the officially atheist Communist Party and eliminating any challenge to its power over people's lives. Close quote. And then moving on to another quote. Sorry about that. It's all that lovely Chinese weather. Under President Xi Jinping, China's most powerful leader since Mao Zedong, religious believers are seeing their freedoms shrink dramatically even as the country undergoes a religious revival. Experts and activists say that as he consolidates his power, Xi is waging the most severe systematic suppression of Christianity in the country since religious freedom was written into the Chinese Constitution in 1982. Fu also provided video footage of what appeared to be piles of burning Bibles and forms stating that the signatories had renounced their Christian faith. He said that marked the first time since Mao's radical 1966 to 1976 Cultural Revolution that Christians had been compelled to make such declarations under pain of expulsion from school and the loss of welfare benefits, close quote. And I know some of these Christians that have suffered real loss because they proclaimed their faith in Christ. Now think about that for a moment. The current president of China is the most repressive since Mao. As we move deeper into the cataclysm that will engulf the world, someone like Xi Jinping will be truly horrifying in the slaughter and persecutions that he will perpetuate to stay in power, and Christians will be his favorite victims. Oh, and the last statement of this article is only partially correct. Quote, China has an estimated 38 million Protestants, and experts have predicted that the country will have the world's largest Christian population in a few decades. Close quote. A friend of mine, who was responsible for compiling statistics on Christianity in East Asia, says that there are actually 100 million Christians in China. But I do agree with the AP's statement that China will have the biggest population in the world of Christians in a few decades. This is true, and one day, should the Lord delay his return, it will be China that will be the source of missionaries to the world. And in fact, and in some cases, already is. Please pray for the persecuted church in China. Our brothers and sisters there are truly faithful in the ways that most American Christians are not. And one day, the persecution that our Chinese brethren experience now will be experienced in America. The next article is troubling. And like the one before it that I spoke of about China, it represents maybe a turning point. But let's move into the article. It's Denise McAllister forced into hiding by rape and death threats following pro-life tweet. Abortion Twitter mob continues to threaten this rape survivor. This article is long, but it's a sign of just how awful America has become, and it started with a tweet. I'm impressed by how good that tweet was from Denise McAllister. Quote, at the root of abortion hysteria is women's unhinged desire for irresponsible sex. Sex is their god. Abortion is their sacrament. It's abhorrent as women have flung themselves from the heights of being the world's civilizing force to the muck and mire of dehumanizing depravity. Close quote. She was then attacked in a pile-on, but the worst came just a little later. Here's the quote from this article. Quote, McAllister told PJ Media that she received death and rape threats over multiple forums of private communication. They are threats outside of Twitter, stating they know where I live, McAllister said. Threats of rape and strangling. I spoke to the police. I am on home watch. Close quote. Well, continuing another part of the quote, my children are very frightened, she added. And then on Sunday, she left this tweet. Quote, I am facing legit death and rape threats because I have dared to call out women who are hysterical about abortion and to challenge them to be responsible and not to elevate sex to the point that they're willing to kill human life to avoid their responsibilities. How sick is that? Close quote. When she wrote that, many people responded with support for those who wanted to rape and kill her. It got so bad that she had to withdraw from social media. Here's her tweet. Quote, due to threats against my life, my family is asking that I stay off social media until the situation is resolved. I don't want to, but I need to respect their wishes at this time. I hope to return soon. Keep up the good fight, my friends. Close quote. The article ends with this. Quote, Denise McAllister had a point in comparing this to worship. She had struck at the heart of the radical feminist narrative, and the angry responses only further illustrated her point. If people are willing to justify killing unborn babies in their glorification of sex, it seems that they are also willing to justify rape and death threats against a pro-life rape survivor. The rest of us should denounce this as utterly despicable and say a prayer for Denise McAllister. Close quote. This poor woman is a rape survivor, and for them to do something like this to her is shocking. Will Jack Dorsey go to her defense and eliminate the accounts of those who threatened her and supported the threats against her? Of course not. This would not have happened 30 years ago or even 20, and it's a sign, one of many, of how far America has fallen. If you want to know a reason for why I am not proud to be an American, this is one of them. There are bigger reasons, but this makes me so sick that it would be enough to want to live somewhere else. And yes, one of the reasons why I live in Taiwan is that when I was sitting in our Jerusalem apartment, I just could not face the immorality of America. God had called us out of Israel, and I just couldn't face going back to America. The sexual depravity was too much, and the coldness of my fellow Christians, that was also hard. So we decided to see what God had for us to do in Taiwan, and we have been blessed in doing what God called for us to do here. Ultimately, we only have two jobs in this life: share the gospel and help others share the gospel. Everything else is just detail. The reason why I'm writing these articles on this website is because I want you to survive so that you can continue to share the gospel. If you are not interested in sharing the gospel, these warnings are not for you. But I will fear for what will happen to you in the life to come. Life is short. Eternity is long. Choose well. Then there's this one, and it's interesting. It's called 13 Reckonings Hanging in the Balance from Economic Prism. And here are those 13 reckonings. 1. Everyone calls for smaller government as long as their entitlement payments are not restricted. 2. Everyone distrusts the government until the economy contracts and they need a federal bailout via a cheap interest refinance. 3. Everyone says they're for free trade before, not after, their job is offshored to China or Vietnam. 4. Everyone disparages made-in-China products except when they can buy them at Walmart or Costco at everyday low prices. 5. Everyone wants safe and state-of-art infrastructure as long as their taxes aren't raised to pay for it. 6. Everyone despises inflation except when it's inflating their stock portfolio or the price of their home. 7. Everyone derides the ills of government deficits until they are faced with the prospect of fiscal austerity. 8. Everyone favors a trade war as long as it doesn't jack up the price of flat-screen televisions and iPhones. 9. Everyone loves green energy, but only at the expense of their neighbor. 10. Everyone believes in universal health care before, not after, they have to go see a doctor. 10. Everyone loves cheap credit, but only up to the point where it provokes a mass debt default. 11. Oh dear, I think I might have got it wrong. Everyone relishes government-sponsored pharmaceuticals until their family, friends, and neighbors start dying from them. 12, and I guess I must have missed one or numbered it wrong. Everyone wants this, but they also want that, though only if it's on someone else's dime, and on and on and on. Those 13 or 12 or however many are signs of collapse and ruin. It's the destruction of a nation. A nation can survive anything except the corruption of its own people. America died long ago. All that is left is the shell of a country that is slowly collapsing inward, and we only have ourselves to blame. The next one is a YouTube video from Mike from On Point Preparedness, and it's titled, "Obedience to the Law Will Put You in Bondage." Mike from On Point Preparedness makes some excellent points that those thinking about Torah observance should consider. If you believe that we should be following Torah, you have not read Galatians. Of course, the Judaizers don't want you reading that, so they'll tell you that Paul was a false prophet or a false teacher or someone who shouldn't have been included in the New Testament. Believe me, I've gotten a few of those emails. Well, I wrote about that in an article called "The Assault on Paul," and you can read it. I believe that the link is below in this YouTube video, and you can also do a search for it on Omega Shock just do a search for "The Assault on Paul." Paul was as much a part of the 12 disciples as Peter and John. To reject any of what the New Testament says is to reject Christ. You might not know how certain things fit together, and yes, some things are more important than others, but only a fool rejects Galatians. You need to accept the book of Galatians as the words of God, because they are. Moving on. America's oil boom is a fraud. Bill Bonner is an awesome writer, and I love good writing. I really do. Well, he's also got a good mind behind all of that writing, and he said this, quote, "The more the feds falsify price signals in the boom, the more mistakes they are to correct. The more the feds falsify price signals in the boom, the more mistakes there are to correct." For example, this week, a report in the New York Times described a big mistake in the shale oil boom. This is an example, and it's a big one. You'll recall that it turned America from a big importer of oil to a major exporter, and revived much of the heartland with big fracking projects in woebegone regions of Texas and North Dakota. The shale oil boom was even credited with having scuttled the oil market, which dropped from a high of around $130 a barrel in mid-2008 to under $30 in late 2016, thanks to so much new supply. But guess what? The whole boom was fake. It didn't add to wealth, it subtracted from it. Accumulated losses over the past 5 years totaled more than $200 billion, with $36 billion lost in the back-end shale fields in North Dakota alone. $200 billion lost in this shale oil boom. As you know, I've been yelling about this for a long time, and now that the accounting data is in, more and more people are seeing this shale oil boom for what it is, a scam. Peak oil happened right on schedule, just as predicted in 2005. We've been living on the financial version of heroin and cocaine since then. Do you want to keep subtracting hundreds of billions of dollars from the economy? Okay, moving on. Suicide. Don't do it. It's a YouTube video. From Bill Still. No, not from Bill Still. Sorry. We'll get to it. Some guy named Bill. This is a pretty good video from those who are... I'm sorry, it's Bill Whittle. This is a pretty good video from those who are a little less than clear on the topic of suicide. Although Bill Whittle demonstrated a lot of clarity. Why do I say this? Because they missed the point of suicide. They came close, really close, but they still didn't get the main point for most of those who commit suicide. The ultimate anesthetic. Yes, I know all the objections to that statement, but you're just proving that you don't understand suicide if you make those objections. Why do I say this? Because I know, really know, that urge to permanently end the suffering. And I don't like talking about it too much because I'll either look like I'm full of self-pity or in need of earnest hand-holding, which always is annoying. But since there are many of you out there who suffer chronic depression like I do, I need to talk about this from time to time. To those of you who suffer depression and have suffered for years, I am so sorry. I understand so completely that I would not wish that on my worst enemy. And you have my complete empathy and compassion for what you are going through. And yes, I really mean that. For those who do not suffer chronic depression, you need to know that you do not understand and you cannot understand. We certainly do not want you to understand because you would need to suffer as we do. And no, a few months of depression does not give you the understanding that I'm talking about. Chronic depression never ends, and you know that it will never end. You might have times of relief, but you know that it is only temporary. Those who suffer truly chronic depression, they know that death will be the only way that it will ever end. And that, my friends, is why most people commit suicide. Should the Lord take me home early, it will be a relief more profound than you can possibly know. I would never ever hasten that day since I earnestly embrace the job that God has given me. And for those couple of places where I've talked about that you would like to go look at my discussion on depression, there's a few that you can look at. The first article from 2017 is Dragons, Deception, and Depression. You can do a search for it on omegashock.com, and I also have included that in the comment section below. And then there's another one, actually from just a few months ago, 3 Huge Concerns, Debt, Israel, and Hard Hearts. You can also find that on omegashock.com, and it's also in the comment section below. I mention it here and there in other places, but I think that those 2 links cover the main points best. So don't commit suicide. You have a job to do, and quitting early is frowned upon by God. Please remember that you will need to talk to Him when this life is over. And if you end your life early when you shouldn't have, He'll have something to say to you. But trust me when I understand how you're feeling. I really do. And I'm really sorry. But keep running that race as best as you can. Now, moving on to, I'm not sure this is more positive, it's just different. It's titled Strange Events in America 2018 to 2019 on YouTube, but that title is not exactly talking about what it's supposed to be talking about. This is about the opioid overdose deaths in America, and I'm annoyed with this Jason A. guy who is either sloppy or not interested in, or not honest in his titles. I'm not sure why he gets his titles wrong like this, but he seems to do it a lot. But back to the opioid problem, specifically opioids prescribed by doctors. When I see all the heroin and opioids produced and consumed by America, I am reminded of something that I've said before, in fact, just a couple weeks ago. Quote, and it's a long one, America has the highest rate of overdose deaths per capita of any country in the world. Number 1. And every time I see how huge the opioid use and death rate is in America, I think of Revelation 18:23 and the fall of Babylon the Great. Quote, The light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth, for by thy sorceries were all nations deceived. Close quote. Revelation 18:23. The word sorceries is pharmakia. That should sound familiar to you since that refers to drugs. And America is the #1 supplier of opioids in the world. No one produces more heroin than anyone else via Afghanistan. No one. And when you read Revelation 18, and my favorite go-to place for reading portions of the Bible is BibleGateway.com, you find a lot of similarities to the United States. The only thing that's a problem is that this chapter refers to a city. Is the reference to a city just a euphemism, or is it really a closely defined geographical area with a metropolitan government? If it really is a city, then it must be New York City, and that city is truly the most powerful city in the world. No other city comes close, and the destruction of New York City would rock the world. Oh, and the biggest drug dealer in the world, the CIA, was started by Wall Street bankers. And that's a fact. Okay, here's our last topic, and it's media blackout on dire global debt. Greg Mannarino from Greg Hunter's USA Watchdog. In this interview, Greg talks about the crash that is worse than your worst nightmares. And I'm afraid that it's inevitable. Let me quote a few things from the write-up. Quote, This is what is happening right now on a global scale. The world is overdosing on debt. I cannot stress that enough. So what we are witnessing here in regard to the emerging markets is a currency meltdown. World central banks are colluding with the leaders, and they honestly have no choice because the party ended in 2008. They have done all they can to reinflate bubbles by introducing debt on every single living soul on this planet, unlike we have ever seen in the history of the world. When this thing hits a point of maximum saturation, we are going to see cracks where the debt market let go before everything else. And that's exactly what we are seeing here. And then another quote from his write-up. It all comes down to keeping the world awash in debt because that is the way the system functions. Last time, in 2008, we bailed out the banks. This time, we're going to bail out countries. And then a third quote. In closing, Mannarino predicts if debt is maxed out and it just evaporates, we will lose half the world population in a very short amount of time. Close quote. This is straight out of the book of Revelation and the Ride of the Four Horsemen. It will be wholesale death and destruction, and I believe that this will bring Ezekiel's fire. And unfortunately, Ezekiel's fire will not be the last of this. As I've said in other places, the death of 1 billion people will just be a down payment on what is to come. It's going to be bad, kids. Please prepare for this. Okay, that's it for this week's ShockCast. I truly hope that you'll be ready for what is coming. A prudent man foreseeth the evil and hideth himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. Proverbs 22:3. If you find a flaw in my reasoning, have a question, or wish to add your own viewpoint, leave a comment on the Omega Shock website or in the comment section below. Omega Shock readers and ShockCast listeners leave awesome comments, and I value each and every one of them. Again, make sure that you are subscribed to the Shock Letter at theshockletter.com. In fact, everyone should sign up for the Shock Letter. It's free. Subscribing and unsubscribing is easy. And there's no way that I would ever share the subscription list with anyone. Period. You have my promise on that. For those of you on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and click the bell to get notifications. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. All of that helps you and me get the message out. And as this video ends, you'll see links that appear in boxes within this video. Those links will take you to other ShockCasts, a link to subscribe to the ShockCast, as well as a link to the playlist of the important videos of this past week. And you will see the links to that playlist in the comment section below. And so, allow me to close with this blessing from Numbers 6:24-26. Yevarechecha Yehovah Yishmerecha. Ya'er Yehovah. Panav Elecha V'yichunecha. Yisa Yehovah, Panav Elecha V'yasem Lecha Shalom. The Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. The Lord lift up his countenance upon thee and give thee peace. Numbers 6:24-26. May your pastors give you the words that you need to continue to walk the path that God calls for you to walk. And Lord willing, I will see all of you next week.